name is Vizya, English teacher, working as school assistant at ZPHS Dommeru, East Godavari district. I am glad to meet you again to discuss first chapter, A Triumph of Surgery by James Herriot. 10th class supplementary reader, Footprints Without Feet. This chapter is about a cute dog, Tricky, who was pampered and overfed with unhealthy treats by his rich mistress, Mrs. Pumphrey. When he got sick, Mr. Harriet, a veterinary doctor, was called for. Then, with his professional skills, how he had treated his sickness and how Tricky went back to Mrs. Pumphrey without surgery, from surgery, all the interesting topics we are going to discuss now. Let's enjoy English language through this session. Before we enter into our lesson, let's have a look at the overview of today's session. Overview of this module 4. A Triumph of Surgery by James Herriot. The chapter in this session is mainly divided into 3 parts. Firstly, we will be enjoying read and find out activity in 2 segments, where we are going to read important events of the story followed by a few comprehension check activity questions. Then we will go into thinking about it activity, in which we will be reflecting on the text we have read. Finally, we are going to involve ourselves in talk about it activity. Now, as we got an idea on the overview of this module, let us see what are the learning objectives of this module. Learning objectives. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to identify different characters in A Triumph of Surgery. Restate important events in the story. Recall the concepts from the story after reading the text and answer the questions. Relate the important events of the story with that of your real life experiences. Recognize the inner message of the text. Express your ideas on the story and on the characters as well. Now, as we learnt about learning objectives of today's session, without any waiting, let's move on to first part of our module, Read and Find Out activity. Read and find out. A Triumph of Surgery was written by James Alfred White, well known with his pseudonym or pen name as James Herriot. He was a British veterinary surgeon and writer who used his many years of experience to write many books. He was the narrator of this story. The story began when Mrs. Pumphrey, a rich lady, took her dog Tricky for a walk outside. As a part of their regular walking, a nearby veterinary doctor, who was also narrator of the story, named Harriet, saw the dog and was worried, as the dog looked like a bloated sausage, having leg at each corner. When the narrator met Mrs. Pumphrey's fat pet, Tricky, it looked like a bloated sausage. Sausage meant finely minced meat stuffed into long cylindrical cases. Yes. Then he inquired if she had cut down the sweet things diet for Tricky.
Mrs. Pumphrey replied that she had been giving him extra snacks like malt, cod liver oil, and Horlicks apart from his main meals to improve his condition. So, this is not what Mr. Harriet had asked for. She also continued to satisfy his sweet tooth with cream cakes and chocolates. Harriet asked if she was giving plenty of exercise at least. For that, Mrs. Pumphrey replied, "Not much." Then it might not be good for Tricky, right? Yes. Harriet warned her that if she had not cut the diet and had not given more exercise, he would definitely fall ill. Though Mrs. Pumphrey assured him that she would look into it, she was not able to cut down food to the dog. It might be disastrous for Tricky and might lead to his illness if this continued. We'll see what happened next. Soon, Tricky fell sick as expected, and Mrs. Pumphrey worried a lot. The doctor, Mr. Harriet, was called. He had his plans and suggested that he had to be hospitalized for a fortnight to be kept under observation. As we read first segment of the text, we will see how far we can find answers to the read and find out questions. Question number 1. Why is Mrs. Pumphrey worried about Tricky? Answer. Mrs. Pumphrey is worried about Tricky because the options given here are he is unwell, he is eating a lot. What's the right option? Yes, you are right. He is unwell. Right. Well done. Second question. Who does I refer to in this story? I refers to option 1 here is Mrs. Pumphrey. Option 2 is Mr. Harriet. What's the right option? Yes, you are right, Mr. Harriet, because he was the narrator of this story. Well done. Now we will continue reading the second segment. Then he took the dog along and made up a bed for him in his surgery. The dog didn't move much. He didn't eat anything also for the first 2 days. Then he looked around and whimpered a little bit. The vet gave plenty of water with no food for 2 days. So here the surgery meant a place where a doctor, a dentist, or a veterinary surgeon treats patients or animals. So he took Tricky to his hospital. Finally, on the third day, he went out and played with the other big dogs. He also licked the bowls of the other dogs on the third day. Yes, finally, he became active. He became an accepted member of the gang, an unlikely silky little object among the shaggy crew, fighting like a tiger for his share at meal times. So Tricky even regained its natural power to fight also. When this news that he started fighting with other dogs for food reached Mrs. Pumphrey, she started sending eggs for Tricky. Mr. Harriet enjoyed those eggs for his breakfast with his partner. After some time, Mrs. Pumphrey started sending wine for her pet, thinking it would improve his blood, which was consumed in reality by Mr. Harriet. Lunch became a ceremonial occasion with 2 glasses of wine before and several during the meal for Harriet. When she finally sent bottles of brandy for Tricky, the vet thought of making him a permanent guest in the surgery. Oh no! This would be very unprofessional if he had done that one. Do you think Harriet can do such things? Of course not. Now we will have a few questions to find out what we have read. The question given here is the narrator as rich as Tricky's mistress? The options given here are yes, no. What's the right answer? Yes, you are right. The option no is the right answer. The sentence lunch became ceremonial after receiving the wine hinted us that he was not as rich as Trick's mistress. Well done. The question given here is how does he treat the dog? Answer: he treated him in the same manner as he would treat any other dog. But you have to add one more sentence to this answer. For that one, the options given here are: first option, he gave limited food, excess water with sufficient exercise. He gave all the eggs, wine and brandy sent by his mistress. What's the right answer? Yes, you are right. He treated him in the same manner as he would treat any other dog. He gave limited food, excess water with sufficient exercise. Well done. Keep going. Now we will continue reading the second segment. He knew Mrs. Pumphrey was suffering and after a fortnight felt compelled and told her that the little dog had recovered and was awaiting collection. Oh, that's a good news for Mrs. Pumphrey. Within minutes, about 30 feet of gleaming black metal drew up outside the surgery. Mr. Harriot could make out the figure of Mrs. Pumphrey inside. Her hands were tightly clasped in front of her. Her lips trembled. So the black metal phrase referred here was nothing but the vehicle. Her clasping hands and trembling lips reflected her emotional state. That is, her anxiousness towards Tricky's health. Within minutes, the vehicle arrived. This was a sign of her love towards her pet. Hope it's clear to you. The vet walked through the house into the garden. A mass of dogs was hurtling round and round the lawn, and in their midst, ears flapping, tail waving, was the little golden figure of Tricky. Actually, Tricky never had that wonderful company of friends in his life. So he was completely enjoying that moment. When Tricky saw his mistress, he took off from his arms in a tremendous leap and sailed into Mrs. Pumphrey's lap. Tricky was really happy to see her. See how Tricky sailed into Mrs. Pumphrey's lap. What a lovely reunion after a fortnight. Mrs. Pumphrey, with trembling lips and tears in her eyes, exclaimed to Mr. Harriot how she could ever thank him for making Tricky well. That was a triumph of surgery. Look how the tears rolled down. As we completed read and find out activity, now we will discuss think about it activity. Here we go. Think about it. The question given under think about it activity here is, what kind of person do you think the narrator, a veterinary surgeon, is? Answer. The narrator, a veterinary surgeon, is a dash. The options given here are: first option, capable, tactful person as well as full of common sense. Second option, incapable, insensitive, without any common sense. What is the right option? Yes, you are right. The narrator, a veterinary surgeon, is a capable, tactful person as well as full of common sense. Here is a clap for you. One more question under think about it activity. Do you think Tricky was happy to go home? The options given here are: first option, yes. Second option, no. What's the right option? Yes. Tricky was happy to go home. So yes is the right option. This we can say because he sailed into his mistress' lap when he saw her. Right? See how Tricky was sailing on to Mrs. Pumphrey. Right? Yes. Here is a badge for you. Next question under think about it activity. What do you think will happen now after the return of Tricky from surgery? The options given here are: option A. Mrs. Pumphrey will now be careful about Tricky's diet and health. Option B. Mrs. Pumphrey may also give him exercise daily as prescribed by the vet earlier. Option C. Both A and B. What's the right answer? Yes, you are right. Option C, both A and B. So here is a big applause for you. Now we will discuss a few reflecting questions under talk about activity. Talk about it activity. Here we need to reflect and share our opinion. The first question or situation given here is: the episode describes the silly behavior of a rich woman who is foolishly indulgent, perhaps because she is lonely. What do you think of such people? Are they merely silly? Or can their actions cause harm to others? The options given here are: first option, such people are merely silly and harmless. Second option, such people's actions can cause harm to others. What's the right answer? Yes, sometimes such people are merely silly and harmless, but sometimes such people's actions can cause harm to others. So both are acceptable. Why? Because we have seen in our lesson how Tricky's health been affected because of Mrs. Pumphrey's indulgent behavior, right? So such actions can cause harm also. Okay, so both are right answers. Congratulations. Now we will move to next question. The next question under talk about it activity is, do you think there are also parents like Mrs. Pumphrey? The options given here are, yes, there are parents like Mrs. Pumphrey. The next option, no, there are no such parents like Mrs. Pumphrey. Just reflect and think about it. Yes, what's the right answer? Yes, there are parents like Mrs. Pumphrey. Their overcaring behavior or overindulging behavior might affect the children also. Right? Yes, you are doing great. One more question under talk about it activity. What would you have done if you were a member of the staff in Mrs. Pumphrey's household? Answer. If I were a member of the staff in her household, the options given here are option A. I would have not followed Mrs. Pumphrey's command to feed Tricky blindly. Option B. I would have fed him according to the vet's advice. Option C. I would have taken him for extra walk. Option D. All the above. What's the right option? Yes, option D is the right answer. All the above are suggestible behaviors. Right? Yes. Very good. You need to treat the pet animals in a proper way. Good job. What would you have done if you were in the narrator's place? Answer. If I were in the narrator's place, I would have treated Tricky dash. What are the options given here? First option, with a similar amount of compassion and love like that of the narrator. Second option, with all the eggs wine Mrs. Pumphrey had sent to make him healthier. What's the right answer? Yes, you are right. If I were in the narrator's place, I would have treated Tricky with a similar amount of compassion and love like that of the narrator. Here is a badge for you. Well done. Here is a list of books under suggested reading. The first one is Rikki Tikki Tavi by Rudyard Kipling. It's about a brave mongoose. The second one is Dog Stories by James Herriot. As we discussed earlier, from his experience, he wrote many books. This is also one. The third book under suggested reading is A Zoo in Malagasy by Zerel Durrell. Gerald was a naturalist and animal lover, and his expedition to Cameroon has been depicted in this book. The next one is A Tiger Comes to Town by R.K. Narayan. As the title suggests, a tiger escaped from a circus and enters a town, and how he experiences, how he feels about the people, all his experiences are depicted in this story. So, enjoy reading these books and share your opinion with your teacher and friends. Happy reading. Now we are entering into the last part of our session, assessment. Here we go. Assessment. How many main characters were there in the story of A Triumph of Surgery? Options given here are 5, 4, 3. What's the right answer? Yes, you are right. Option 3 is the right answer. There are three main characters in the story of A Triumph of Surgery. Congrats! Next question. Who do you blame for Tricky's illness? Option A, Mrs. Pumphrey. Option B, Tricky. Option C, Harriet. Option D, Wet. What's the right option? Yes, option A. Mrs. Pumphrey is responsible for Tricky's illness. Good job. Next question. Did Mrs. Pumphrey cut down on sweets as was advised? Option A. Yes. Option B. No. Option C. Only for a while. Option D. She was not advised anything like that. What's the right answer? Yes, you are right. Option B. Well done. When Tricky was seriously ill, who did Mrs. Pumphrey make a frantic call? Options given here are option A to her son, option B to Mr. Michael, option C to Mr. Harriet, option D to her maid servant. What's the right option? Yes, you are right. Option C to Mr. Harriet because he was a veterinary surgeon. Well done. Here is a star for you. What does the narrator refer to Tricky as in the group of other dogs? Choose more than one. The options given here are option A, a silky little object. Option B, shaggy little object. Option C, he didn't say anything. Option D, a golden figure. So what are the two options you choose here? Option A and D or option B and C? What's the right answer? Yes, you are right. Option A and D. Good job. What is the name of the veterinary surgeon? Option A, Miss Tricky. Option B, Mrs. Pumphrey. Option C, Mr. Hodgkin. Option D, Mr. Harriet. What's the right option? Yes, you are right. Option D, Mr. Harriet. Here is a cup for you. Well done. The last question under assessment. Within minutes, about 30 feet of gleaming black metal drew up outside the surgery. What does the phrase 30 feet of gleaming black metal refer here? The options given here are option A huge dog, B, a luxurious car, C, a big horse. What's the right answer? Yes, option B, a luxurious car. Here is a medal for you. Congratulations! Summary or what we have learned in this session. We have identified different characters in A Triumph of Surgery, restated important events in the story, recalled the concepts from the story after reading the text and answered the questions, related the important events of the story with that of our real life experiences or our ideas, recognized the inner message of the text, expressed our ideas on the story and on the characters as well. Enjoy reading the text and discuss important concepts and events with your teacher and friends, and find out the answers for these sample questions you might get in examinations. Excess of anything is bad. This is what we have learned from this story. That's all for today. Happy learning, dear students.